Amy Carter felt the ship shake around her as another blast hit the hull. Red lights flashed in the small bridge of the Earth scout vessel as alarms screamed warnings she already knew too well. Her ship was dying, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The Zephyrian attack ships had come out of nowhere near the edge of human space. Amy had been on a routine patrol mission when the massive alien vessels appeared on her sensors. She tried to run, but her small ship was no match for their speed. Now she watched helplessly as her engines failed and life support began to shut down. Amy grabbed her emergency kit and ran to the escape pod. She could hear the hull cracking as she sealed herself inside the tiny survival craft. The pod launched, just as her ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. She was alone in the cold darkness of space, with nothing but a distress beacon that might never be heard. Hours passed before the alien ships found her pod. Amy watched through the small window as massive claws grabbed her craft and pulled it into a cargo bay. The pod door hissed open, and she found herself staring up at creatures from her worst nightmares. The Zephyrians stood 12 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and bodies covered in thick shell-like skin. Their eyes glowed yellow in faces that looked like a mix of insect and reptile. One of them grabbed Amy with 2 hands and lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. They threw her into a metal cage barely big enough for her to sit up straight. The cage was loaded onto a transport ship, along with dozens of others containing various alien species. Amy realized with growing horror that she had become a slave. The journey to Corvash Prime took 3 days. Amy tried to talk to the other prisoners, but most spoke languages she did not know. A few could speak basic Galactic Common, and they told her terrible stories about where they were going. They spoke of great arenas where slaves fought and died for the entertainment of their captors. When they arrived at the Zephyrian capital world, Amy saw a planet covered in massive cities that stretched as far as the eye could see. Huge towers reached up into the clouds while flying vehicles moved between them like swarms of insects. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The slave ship landed in a facility that looked like a giant warehouse. Amy and the other prisoners were herded into holding areas where they were sorted by size and species. She found herself in a section with other small aliens that the Zephyrians clearly considered weak. In the holding pen, Amy met other humans who had been captured in recent raids. Dr. Marcus Webb was a scientist who had been taken from a research station. Lisa Grant had been a Marine on a colony world before the Zephyrians attacked. They explained what Amy had already guessed. Humans were considered the weakest species in known space. Marcus told her that humans had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel and joined the galactic community. Most alien species saw them as primitive creatures barely worth notice. The Zephyrians captured humans because they made interesting novelty fighters in their arenas, though few lived through even one battle. Lisa was angry and wanted to fight their way out, but Marcus explained how impossible that would be. The Zephyrians were not only much larger and stronger than humans, they had weapons and technology that made resistance seem hopeless. The best they could do was try to survive long enough for rescue that might never come. On their second day in the holding pen, Warlord Krex came to examine the new slaves. He was even larger than the other Zephyrians, with scars covering his shell, and metal implants replacing one of his arms. His yellow eyes studied each prisoner like they were pieces of meat. When Krex reached Amy, he stopped and tilted his massive head to one side. Something about the way she stood straight and met his gaze seemed to interest him. He spoke to his assistants in their clicking language before moving on to the next cage. Later that day, guards came for Amy. They dragged her from the holding pen despite the protests of Marcus and Lisa. She was taken to a different area of the facility where individual cells lined long corridors. The guards threw her into one of the small rooms and locked the metal door. Through the bars, Amy could see other prisoners in nearby cells. Some were aliens she had never seen before, while others looked like they had been fighting in the arena for a long time. Their bodies were covered in scars, and they had the hollow look of creatures who had given up hope. An older human in the cell next to hers introduced himself as Jack Stone. He had been captured 6 months ago and somehow managed to survive 3 arena fights. Jack explained that Warlord Krex liked to find fighters with potential and train them properly before throwing them to the crowds. Amy learned that she would be given basic weapons training and then forced to fight in the arena within a week. The crowds loved to watch humans die because they were considered so weak and helpless. Most human fighters lasted less than 5 minutes against even the smallest alien opponents. As Amy lay on the hard metal bed in her cell, she thought about her training as an Earth Defense Force officer. She had been taught to never give up and to always look for advantages even in hopeless situations. The aliens might think humans were weak, but they had never faced someone like Amy Carter before. The arena was much larger than Amy had imagined. Thousands of aliens filled the seats that rose up in circles around the fighting floor. Their roars and shrieks created a wall of sound that seemed to press down on her as she walked through the entrance gate. Amy wore simple leather armor and carried a short sword and shield that felt clumsy in her hands. The weapons were designed for much larger fighters, and she had to adjust her grip to make them work. Across the sandy arena floor, another gate opened and her opponent stepped out. The Vrakan warrior was twice her size, with green scaled skin and long claws on his hands and feet. His snake-like head swayed back and forth as he studied Amy with cold yellow eyes. The crowd laughed and cheered when they saw the tiny human facing the deadly reptilian fighter. Jack Stone had warned Amy about the Vrakan species during their brief training sessions. They were fast and poisonous with fangs that could kill in seconds. Most fighters tried to stay away from them and use long weapons, but Amy had been given only the basic sword and shield of a beginning gladiator. The arena master raised his staff and the crowd fell quiet. Amy could hear her own heartbeat as she waited for the signal to begin. She thought about her military training and all the survival courses she had taken. This was just another combat situation, and she would treat it like any other mission. The staff came down, and the Vrakan warrior immediately charged toward Amy with amazing speed. His claws dug into the sand as he covered the distance between them in just a few bounds. Most fighters would have panicked or tried to run, but Amy held her ground and watched his movement pattern. At the last second, Amy rolled to her left and brought her shield up to block the Vrakan's claws. The impact nearly broke her arm, but she managed to slash with her sword as the creature went past her. The blade cut a shallow line across his scaled leg, and dark blood dripped onto the sand. The crowd went silent with surprise. No human had ever drawn first blood against a Vrakan warrior. The reptilian fighter turned and hissed with anger as he realized this small opponent might actually be dangerous. Amy circled around the arena, keeping her distance and watching how the Vrakan moved. She noticed that he favored his right side when attacking, and that his long tail sometimes got in his way when he turned quickly. These were small weaknesses, but they might be enough if she was smart about using them. The Vrakan attacked again, this time more carefully. His claws swept in wide arcs, trying to catch Amy before she could dodge away. She ducked under one swipe and blocked another with her shield, always moving and never staying in one place long enough for him to pin her down. Minutes passed as they fought back and forth across the arena floor. The crowd began to murmur with confusion. Humans were supposed to die quickly, not dance around making their opponents work for the kill. Some aliens in the seats started to cheer for Amy as they realized they were watching something special. Amy was getting tired from the constant movement, but she could see that the Vrakan was getting frustrated. He was used to opponents who either ran in fear or stood still and fought, not ones who moved like water and struck like lightning when he least expected it. Her chance came when the Vrakan lunged forward with both claws extended. Amy dropped, flat on her back, and thrust her sword upward as the creature passed over her. The blade went deep into his chest, and Amy rolled away as he crashed into the sand. The Vrakan warrior lay still for a moment before trying to get back up. Amy could see that her sword had found something important inside his body, but he was not dead yet. Dark blood flowed from the wound as he turned to face her again, his eyes now filled with desperate fury. This time when he attacked, the Vrakan was slower and less coordinated. Amy stayed just out of reach of his weakening strikes while looking for another opening. When he stumbled slightly from blood loss, she moved in fast and drove her blade into his neck just below his head. The great reptilian warrior fell forward and did not move again. Amy stood over his body, breathing hard and covered in sand and blood. The arena was completely quiet as thousands of aliens stared down at the impossible sight of a human standing over a dead Vrakan. Then the cheering began. First, just a few voices, then more and more until the entire arena was filled with roars of approval. Amy raised her sword toward the crowd and they cheered even louder. She had done something that no human had ever done before. Back in her cell, that night, Amy found that word of her victory had spread through the entire slave complex. Other prisoners who had ignored her before now looked at her with respect and curiosity. Some of the alien gladiators even nodded to her as she passed their cells. Jack Stone was amazed by what had happened. He explained that Vrakan warriors were considered mid-level opponents in the arena hierarchy. Most humans were only expected to fight against the weakest creatures or other humans. For Amy to kill a Vrakan in her first match was unheard of. More importantly, Amy had caught the attention of some very powerful beings. Warlord Krex had been watching from the noble boxes and had immediately increased her value as a fighter. There were even rumors that Princess Lyra herself had been in attendance, though such high nobility rarely bothered with gladiator matches. Amy learned that her next fight would be in 2 weeks against a stronger opponent. The arena masters wanted to see if her victory had been luck or skill. If she won again, she would start moving up the ranks toward the more prestigious matches that drew bigger crowds and larger bets. As she fell asleep on her hard prison bed, Amy thought about Marcus Webb and Lisa Grant still trapped in the holding pens. She had proven that humans could fight and win, but now she needed to prove they could do much more than that. Her victory today was just the first step in a much larger plan that was beginning to form in her mind. 3 months had passed since Amy's first victory, and the arena had become her second home. She had fought 12 battles and won them all, each victory more impressive than the last. The crowds now chanted her name when she entered the fighting floor, something that had never happened for a human gladiator before. Her most recent opponent had been a Gorlak Crusher, a massive rock-like creature that stood 8 feet tall and weighed as much as a small vehicle. Everyone expected Amy to be smashed flat within seconds, but she had studied the creature's movements during other fights and noticed that it was slow to change direction once it started moving. When the Gorlak charged at her like a living boulder, Amy waited until the last possible moment before diving aside. The creature crashed into the arena wall with tremendous force, stunning itself long enough for Amy to climb onto its back and drive her blade into the weak spot where its rocky plates joined together. The crowd had gone wild with excitement as the mighty Gorlak toppled forward and did not get up again. Amy stood on top of the fallen giant and raised her arms in victory while thousands of alien voices cheered her name. She was no longer just a human slave. She had become something far more dangerous, a symbol. Between fights, Amy had been busy with activities that her captors knew nothing about. She had learned to speak several alien languages by listening to the guards and other prisoners. More importantly, she had begun organizing the other human slaves who had been brought to the arena complex. Marcus Webb had been moved from the holding pens to work in the arena's medical facility, where his knowledge of different species made him valuable for treating injured fighters. From there, he was able to gather information about the arena's security systems and daily operations. He also used his scientific training to analyze alien weapons and fighting techniques. Lisa Grant had been assigned to the maintenance crews that kept the arena facilities running. Her military background helped her understand the layout of the complex and identify potential weak points in their defenses. She also recruited other humans in the work crews who were willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. Amy's growing reputation had attracted attention from across the Zephyrian Empire. Noble families came from distant worlds to watch her fights and place bets on whether she would survive her next opponent. The arena masters were making enormous profits from her matches, and Warlord Krex had become one of the wealthiest beings on Corvash Prime. More interesting to Amy was the fact that other species had begun studying human fighting techniques. She had introduced concepts like mobility, timing, and using an opponent's strength against them that were new to many gladiators. Some alien fighters even asked their trainers to teach them these human methods. Amy's influence was spreading beyond just combat techniques. In the slave quarters, she taught other humans about leadership and working together as a team. She explained that their greatest strength was not individual ability, but their willingness to cooperate and sacrifice for each other, something that many alien species had forgotten in their pursuit of personal glory. Her reputation eventually reached the highest levels of Zephyrian society. Princess Lyra, daughter of Emperor Vorthak and heir to the throne, had become fascinated by the reports of a human who fought like no creature anyone had ever seen. She began attending Amy's matches in disguise, sitting in different parts of the arena to observe without being recognized. Princess Lyra was not like other members of the royal family. She had studied the histories of many different species and understood that the empire had grown weak through centuries of believing in their own superiority. She saw in Amy something that could change everything, though she was not yet ready to act on these dangerous thoughts. Amy's 14th victory came against a pack of Fenris hunters, wolf-like creatures that fought as a coordinated group. The Bay arena masters thought that even Amy could not handle multiple opponents at once, but they had underestimated human intelligence once again. Instead of trying to fight all 5 Fenris at the same time, Amy used the arena's obstacles and barriers to separate them. She wounded one hunter and let its blood trail lead the others into a narrow passage where they could not surround her. Then she picked them off one by one, using their pack instincts against them. The crowd was amazed by this display of tactical thinking. Most gladiators relied on strength, speed, or natural weapons to win their fights. Amy was the first fighter they had ever seen who seemed to think several moves ahead, like she was playing some complex game instead of fighting for her life. After her victory over the Fenris pack, Amy was moved to better quarters in the gladiator section of the complex. She now had her own cell with a real bed and access to better food and training equipment. More importantly, she was allowed to interact with other successful gladiators during their rest periods. This gave Amy the chance to learn from fighters who had survived dozens of arena battles. She studied their techniques and shared her own knowledge in return. Some of these gladiators had been slaves for many years and had given up hope of ever being free, but Amy's example began to change their thinking. Among her new companions was Tarek the Bold, a 4-armed Zerion warrior who had won 37 consecutive matches. He was fascinated by Amy's ability to defeat larger opponents through intelligence rather than brute force. Tarek began teaching Amy advanced weapons techniques, while she showed him human concepts of strategy and planning. Another ally was Zara 9 Lives, a cat-like Cathari assassin who was serving a life sentence for crimes against the royal family. Zara was suspicious of everyone and trusted no one, but she recognized that Amy was different from other fighters. She began sharing information about the arena's security systems and the weaknesses of various alien species. As Amy's win total reached 15 matches, rumors began spreading that Emperor Vorthak himself might attend one of her future fights. No emperor had visited the gladiator arena in over 50 years, but Amy's impossible victories were creating excitement throughout the empire. Amy knew that imperial attention could be both an opportunity and a deadly threat. If she could impress the emperor, She might gain access to levels of power she had never dreamed of reaching. But if she failed to meet his expectations, or if he saw her as a potential threat to his rule, she would disappear quickly and quietly. Time was approaching when Amy would have to make her move. She had built a network of allies, gathered intelligence about her enemies, and proven that humans could not only survive but thrive in this alien world. Soon she would face her greatest challenge yet, and the fate of every human in the galaxy might depend on whether she was ready for what came next. The grand tournament came with fanfare that shook the very foundations of Corvash Prime. Ships from across the Zephyrian Empire brought spectators to witness the most prestigious gladiatorial event in the galaxy. Amy watched from her cell window, as the sky filled with vessels carrying nobles, merchants, and warriors from dozens of different worlds. Emperor Vorthak had indeed decided to attend, making this the first grand tournament graced by imperial presence in 53 years. The arena complex buzzed with preparation as workers expanded the seating areas and installed special viewing boxes for the highest-ranking visitors. Amy had won 23 consecutive matches by the time the tournament began, making her the most successful human gladiator in recorded history. Her name was known throughout the Empire, and bets on her matches had created fortunes for those brave enough to support her against impossible odds. The tournament structure was different from regular arena fights. Instead of single combat matches spread over weeks or months, the grand tournament featured multiple rounds over 5 days, with the survivors advancing toward a final championship bout. The winner would face destroyer Malik, the current grand champion who had held his title for 7 years. Amy's first tournament opponent was a crystalline warrior from the Proxima system. These creatures were made of living crystal that could bend and focus light into deadly beams. Most fighters tried to attack them from behind or use heavy weapons to shatter their crystal bodies, but Amy had studied their abilities and developed a different approach. When the crystalline warrior began generating blinding flashes of light, Amy did not try to shield her eyes or look away. Instead, she grabbed handfuls of arena sand and threw them into the air around her opponent. The tiny particles scattered the focused light beams and created a glittering cloud that confused the creature's targeting systems. Unable to see clearly through the swirling sand, the crystalline warrior stumbled and fell. Amy was on it instantly, using her sword not to shatter the crystal, but to wedge it into the creature's joints where the living rock was weakest. The warrior collapsed into pieces that scattered across the arena floor like broken glass. The crowd roared with approval at this display of tactical brilliance. Amy had not just defeated a dangerous opponent, she had done it in a way that no one had ever attempted before. The betting odds on her survival shifted dramatically as more spectators began to believe she might actually make it to the championship round. Between tournament matches, Amy received an unexpected visitor in her cell. A figure in a hooded cloak approached her door after the guards had been mysteriously called away. When the hood came down, Amy found herself face to face with Princess Lyra. The princess was younger than Amy had expected, probably in her early 20s by human standards. Her skin had the pale green tint of royal Zephyrian bloodlines, and her eyes were the bright gold that marked her as a direct descendant of ancient emperors. But there was something different about her, an intelligence and curiosity that seemed out of place in the imperial family. Princess Lyra explained that she had been studying human culture and history for months, ever since Amy's first victory had caught her attention. She was fascinated by humanity's rapid technological development and their unusual social structures that emphasized cooperation over individual dominance. Amy saw an opportunity and took it. She began describing her vision of an empire where species worked together based on merit and ability rather than ancient prejudices about strength and superiority. She explained how human innovations in technology and tactics could benefit everyone if they were allowed to contribute as equals rather than being enslaved as entertainment. The princess listened with growing excitement as Amy outlined possibilities that had never occurred to the royal court. She confessed that she had long believed the empire was stagnating under the weight of its own traditions, but she had never imagined alternatives until she witnessed what humans could accomplish when given the chance. Their conversation was interrupted when guards returned to the cell block, forcing Princess Lyra to hide her identity once again. But before she left, she whispered that she would be watching Amy's remaining matches with great interest, and that changes might be possible if Amy continued to prove human worth on the galactic stage. Amy's second tournament opponent was the Hive Queen's champion, an insect-like creature that secreted deadly poisons from specialized glands in its body. The arena floor was modified with maze-like barriers coated with neutralizing chemicals, but touching the creature itself would mean almost certain death. Most fighters would have tried to use ranged weapons or avoid contact entirely, but Amy had learned from her study of Earth insects that these creatures often had predictable behavioral patterns. She spent the first part of the match observing how the champion moved and responded to different stimuli. When she noticed that the creature always turned left when faced with a dead end, Amy began herding it through the maze toward a section where the barriers formed a trap. She used her superior speed and agility to stay just ahead of the pursuing champion, leading it exactly where she wanted it to go. The Hive Queen's champion found itself stuck in a narrow passage with no room to turn around. Amy climbed onto the barriers above it and dropped her sword point first into the creature's head, killing it instantly while avoiding contact with its poisonous body. This victory demonstrated not just Amy's combat skills, but her ability to think like a scientist and strategist. The crowd was beginning to understand that they were watching something unprecedented, a gladiator who could adapt to any situation and find weaknesses in opponents that seemed invincible. The tournament semi-finals pitted Amy against her most dangerous opponent yet, a cybernetically enhanced Zephyrian warrior known as Iron Claw. Half of his body had been replaced with mechanical parts that gave him superhuman strength and speed. His left arm was entirely artificial, ending in metal claws that could cut through steel. Iron Claw had volunteered for the enhancement procedures after losing his original limbs in a mining accident. He fought not for glory, but to prove that technology could make any being stronger than nature intended. His 17 tournament victories had made him a favorite to reach the championship round. The battle was brutal and lasted nearly an hour. Amy's human agility was barely enough to keep her ahead of Iron Claw's mechanical advantages. Every time, she thought she had found an opening. His artificial reflexes allowed him to counter her attacks with devastating force. But Amy noticed that the cybernetic parts of Iron Claw's body moved slightly differently than his organic components. There were tiny delays in coordination between his natural and artificial systems, gaps measured in milliseconds that most opponents would never detect. Amy began targeting these transition points, striking at the joints where metal met flesh, and exploiting the brief moments when his systems had to synchronize. Gradually, she managed to damage several key connections in his cybernetic network. As Iron Claw's enhanced systems began to malfunction, Amy pressed her advantage. She used his own mechanical strength against him, redirecting his attacks so that his metal arm struck his organic body. When his coordination finally failed completely, Amy finished him with a precise strike that severed the main power cable feeding his artificial limbs. The arena erupted in chaos as Amy stood victorious over the fallen cyborg. She had reached the championship round of the grand tournament, something no human had ever dreamed possible. Tomorrow, she would face Destroyer Malik for the title of Grand Champion, with Emperor Vorthak himself watching from the royal box. But Amy knew that winning the tournament was only the beginning of her real plan. She had proven that humans could compete with any species in the galaxy. Now she had to prove that they deserved to lead them. The championship match against Destroyer Malik lasted 4 hours and left both fighters bloodied and exhausted. Amy had faced her greatest challenge yet, an 8-foot-tall Zephyrian warrior whose cybernetic enhancements were far more advanced than Iron Claw's crude mechanical limbs. Malik's entire nervous system had been augmented to give him superhuman reflexes, and his body armor was integrated directly into his skeleton. But Amy had learned something important from her previous fights. Every technological advantage created its own weaknesses. While Malik's enhancements made him incredibly powerful, they also made him dependent on systems that could be disrupted. Amy spent the first hour of their battle studying his movement patterns and identifying the subtle signs that revealed when his augmented systems were processing information. The turning point came when Amy realized that Malik's enhanced reflexes actually slowed him down in certain situations. His cybernetic systems were designed to analyze threats and calculate optimal responses, but this took precious milliseconds that natural instincts could bypass. Amy began making random, seemingly irrational movements that confused his targeting computers and forced him to rely on his unaugmented biological reactions. When Malik's systems finally overloaded from trying to process too many unpredictable variables, Amy struck with devastating precision. She disabled his primary power source and then systematically destroyed each of his enhancement modules until he was forced to fight with only his natural abilities. The former Grand Champion was skilled, but without his technological advantages. He was no match for Amy's years of arena experience. As Destroyer Malik fell to his knees in defeat, the crowd fell silent in shock. Then Emperor Vorthak himself stood up in the royal viewing box and began to applaud. The sound echoed through the arena like thunder, and was quickly joined by thousands of other voices cheering Amy's impossible victory. According to ancient tournament law, Amy now had the right to claim any prize within the Emperor's power to grant. Most champions asked for freedom, wealth, or titles of nobility, but Amy had been planning this moment for months, and her request stunned everyone who heard it. She demanded the right to challenge Emperor Vorthak himself for the throne of the Zephyrian Empire. The arena went completely silent as the implications of her words sank in. No slave had ever made such a demand, and no member of an inferior species had ever been considered worthy of challenging imperial authority. The ancient laws were clear, but no one had ever imagined they might apply to a situation like this. Emperor Vorthak studied Amy for a long moment from his elevated position. He could have refused the challenge and faced the consequences of breaking sacred tournament traditions, but that would have made him appear weak before representatives from across his empire. Instead, he accepted with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. But Amy was not finished with her surprises. As the crowd buzzed with confusion and excitement, she revealed that her months in the arena had been spent building something far more dangerous than just her fighting reputation. She had been organizing a rebellion that stretched across multiple star systems. Marcus Webb stepped forward from the crowd of arena staff where he had been working as a medical assistant. He carried data tablets containing proof that human innovations could revolutionize imperial technology and medicine. His research had identified dozens of ways that human creativity and adaptability could solve problems that had plagued the Empire for generations. Lisa Grant appeared with a group of maintenance workers who had been secretly documenting security weaknesses throughout the arena complex. But more importantly, she carried communication devices that connected Amy to resistance cells on 17 different worlds where her victories had inspired uprisings against Zephyrian rule. Princess Lyra threw back her hood and revealed herself to the shocked crowd. She announced her support for Amy's challenge and presented evidence she had gathered showing widespread corruption and incompetence among the imperial nobility. She declared that the empire needed new leadership based on merit rather than bloodlines, if it was going to survive the challenges of the coming centuries. The revelation that the Emperor's own daughter supported the human challenger sent shockwaves through the arena. Some nobles began shouting for Princess Lyra to be arrested for treason, while others demanded that Amy be executed immediately without trial by combat. But the ancient laws were absolute, and even Emperor Vorthak could not ignore them without destroying the foundations of his authority. As news of Amy's challenge spread beyond the arena, uprisings began on worlds throughout the Empire. The human slave populations that had been captured over the past year rose up in coordinated rebellions, but they were joined by members of other species who had grown tired of Zephyrian oppression and saw Amy's example as proof that change was possible. On Xerion Prime, Tarek the Bold's homeworld, 4 armed warriors stormed Imperial administrative centers while chanting Amy's name. The Cathari resistance movement that Zara 9 Lives belonged to launched attacks on Zephyrian military installations across 3 star systems. Even some Zephyrian citizens began questioning whether their species really deserved to rule over all others. Dr. Marcus Webb's scientific analysis proved to be just as explosive as the military uprisings. His research showed that planets with mixed human and alien populations were already outperforming pure Zephyrian colonies in productivity, innovation, and quality of life. The Empire's policy of species segregation was actually holding back its development and making it vulnerable to more progressive civilizations. Emperor Vorthak found himself facing the greatest crisis in Imperial history. His armies were scattered across dozens of rebellious worlds while his capital city erupted in protests supporting the human challenger. Some of his own generals privately admitted that Amy's victories had exposed serious weaknesses in Imperial military doctrine that needed to be addressed. The Emperor could have declared martial law and attempted to crush the rebellions through brute force, but that would have required him to abandon his challenge with Amy and admit that he was afraid to face her in single combat. His pride and the political necessities of maintaining his authority left him no choice but to proceed with the trial by combat. As Amy prepared for her ultimate battle, she knew that she was fighting for far more than just her own freedom or even human liberation. She was fighting to prove that strength came from unity and adaptation rather than domination and rigid hierarchy. The future of the galaxy itself might depend on whether she could defeat the most powerful being in known space. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just who ruled the Zephyrian Empire, but what kind of civilization it would become. Amy Carter, the captured human soldier who had walked into the arena as a slave, was about to face her final test with the fate of trillions hanging in the balance. Princess Lyra visited Amy one last time before the battle, bringing maps of the Imperial Palace and detailed information about her father's fighting style and weapons preferences. But more importantly, she brought news that Earth itself had received word of Amy's situation and was sending a diplomatic fleet to negotiate for the release of all human prisoners. Amy smiled at this information, but told the princess that diplomacy would not be necessary. Tomorrow she would either win an empire or die trying, but either way the galaxy would never be the same again. The age of Zephyrian supremacy was ending, and the age of cooperation between all species was about to begin. The throne room of the Imperial Palace had been transformed into an arena for the most important battle in galactic history. Representatives from every major species in the Empire filled the massive chamber, while billions more watched through broadcast feeds that reached the farthest corners of known space. Emperor Vorthak stood at the center of the room, wearing the traditional combat armor of ancient Zephyrian warriors. Despite his age, he was still an imposing figure at nearly 13 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and cybernetic enhancements that had been refined over centuries of rule. His reputation as a fighter was legendary, and he had never lost a single combat in over 200 years of life. Amy appeared much smaller in comparison, wearing simple leather armor and carrying weapons that looked almost primitive next to the Emperor's advanced equipment. But appearances could be deceiving, and everyone present had heard the stories of her impossible victories in the arena. She had proven that human intelligence and determination could overcome any physical disadvantage. Princess Lyra served as the official witness for the combat, standing beside the ancient throne that would belong to whoever survived the next few hours. She had spent the morning reviewing constitutional law and preparing the documents that would make Amy's rule legal if she achieved the impossible and defeated her father. The battle began with Emperor Vorthak attacking immediately and without mercy. His four arms moved in coordinated patterns that created a whirlwind of deadly strikes from multiple angles. Most opponents would have been overwhelmed within seconds, but Amy had trained for this moment and knew exactly how to respond. Instead of trying to block or counter the Emperor's attacks, Amy focused entirely on movement and evasion. She had studied recordings of his previous battles and identified the rhythm of his fighting style. Every combination of strikes followed predictable patterns based on centuries of traditional Zephyrian combat training. For the first hour, Amy did nothing but dodge and retreat while the Emperor pursued her around the throne room. The crowd grew restless as they watched what appeared to be a completely one-sided battle. But Amy was actually gathering information about her opponent's capabilities and looking for the weaknesses that every fighter possessed. She noticed that Emperor Vorthak relied heavily on his cybernetic enhancements to coordinate his four-armed fighting style. When his systems calculated attack patterns, there were brief moments where his movements became slightly predictable. Amy began timing her evasions to exploit these microsecond gaps in his defenses. The Emperor's confidence began to waver as Amy continued to avoid his attacks with seemingly impossible precision. He had expected to crush the human challenger quickly and decisively, but instead found himself fighting an opponent who seemed to anticipate his every move. His strikes became more aggressive and less controlled as frustration clouded his tactical judgment. Amy's opportunity came when the Emperor overextended himself during a particularly complex attack combination. She slipped inside his guard and struck at the control nodes for his cybernetic systems, causing temporary malfunctions in his enhanced coordination. Without his technological advantages, the Emperor was forced to rely on his natural fighting ability. The battle transformed into something completely different as both fighters adapted to new circumstances. Emperor Vorthak was still larger and stronger than Amy, but he was no longer the invincible force he had been moments before. Amy pressed her advantage by targeting his cybernetic weak points while staying mobile enough to avoid his devastating counterattacks. As the fight continued, Amy began doing something that stunned everyone watching. She started talking to the Emperor, not taunting or threatening him, but engaging him in philosophical debate about the nature of leadership and the future of the Empire. She questioned why the Zephyrians believed they deserved to rule over other species and challenged him to justify the policies that kept entire civilizations in slavery. Emperor Vorthak found himself defending positions he had never seriously examined before. Amy's questions forced him to confront the contradictions in imperial ideology while simultaneously fighting for his life against her relentless attacks. The mental strain of this dual challenge began to affect his combat performance. Amy pointed out that the Emperor's own daughter had rejected his rule in favor of a more inclusive vision of galactic civilization. She described the uprisings taking place across the Empire and explained that Zephyrian dominance was ending whether he won this battle or not. The only question was whether change would come through evolution or revolution. The psychological warfare proved as effective as Amy's physical attacks. Emperor Vorthak began making mistakes as doubt crept into his mind about the righteousness of his cause. His strikes became wilder and less accurate, while Amy's responses grew more precise and devastating. The end came suddenly when the Emperor attempted one final desperate assault using every enhancement at his disposal. Amy had been waiting for exactly this moment and was ready with a counter that turned his own strength against him. She redirected his attack so that his cybernetic arm struck his organic torso with crushing force, then followed up with a strike that severed the main power coupling for his enhancement systems. Emperor Vorthak collapsed to the marble floor of his own throne room, defeated by a human slave who had entered his empire in chains. Amy stood over him with her sword at his throat, but instead of delivering a killing blow, she offered him something no one expected: mercy and a chance to help build the new order that would replace his failed empire. Princess Lyra stepped forward and proclaimed Amy as the new ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, now to be renamed the Galactic Cooperative. The assembled representatives from across known space knelt before their new empress, some willingly and others from necessity, but all recognizing that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Amy's first acts as ruler shocked everyone with their scope and boldness. She immediately abolished slavery throughout the empire and established merit-based advancement for all species. She created new governmental structures based on cooperation rather than domination, and began integrating human innovations into imperial technology and military doctrine. The transition was not without challenges, as some Zephyrian nobles attempted to organize counter-rebellions, and several outlying systems declared independence rather than accept human leadership. But Amy's network of allies across multiple species provided the support needed to maintain stability while implementing revolutionary changes. Dr. Marcus Webb was appointed as the new Director of Scientific Development and began programs that combined human creativity with alien knowledge to solve problems that had persisted for generations. Lisa Grant became the head of military reorganization and transformed the Imperial forces into a truly integrated force that drew on the strengths of all member species. Princess Lyra, now serving as Amy's chief advisor on constitutional matters, helped draft new laws that guaranteed rights and protections for every sentient being in the cooperative. The former emperor, surprisingly, chose to support the new government and used his knowledge of imperial systems to smooth the transition to more democratic structures. The most dramatic moment came when the Earth diplomatic fleet arrived to find that their captured citizen had become the ruler of the largest political entity in known space. Amy welcomed the Earth representatives as equals and began negotiations for full human membership in the galactic community. Standing on the balcony of the Imperial Palace, Amy looked up at the stars and thought about the incredible journey that had brought her from captured soldier to galactic ruler. She had proven that human determination and adaptability could overcome any obstacle, but more importantly, she had shown that cooperation between different species could create something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. 3. Human age among the stars had officially begun, and Amy Carter, now known as Empress Catherine I, would ensure that it was an age of freedom, equality, and unlimited possibility for all sentient beings. She had walked into the arena alone as a slave, but she had emerged as the leader of an empire built on the revolutionary idea that strength came from unity rather than dominance.